Check, check.
Where there is a will, there is ways. There's ways. Well, thanks. Good morning, church. I have been getting acquainted with many of you. I'm Lisa Jean Hoefner, and I started in ministry in 1975 in New York Conference, New York, and then served in Connecticut. I often served a local church as a pastor, but I also was director of camping and retreat ministries, several sites there. And then I moved to central Pennsylvania, what's now the Susquehanna Conference. Then I moved back to New York, which was the New York Conference, Wyoming Conference, now Upper New York Conference. There's so many changes. And then in 1998, I received a call to come out to Oregon-Idaho Conference, and I've been here just about ever since. I was the director at Subtle Lake Camp, and then was the executive director for all of the camping and retreat ministries for Idaho and Oregon. So I got around, knew a lot of folks, actually preached here a couple of times over the years, back when Chick Cooper was here and when Tim was here and a bunch of different times. So I feel like I kind of know some of you somewhat, and I've been enjoying the walking group. It's been a privilege for me to be able to be both in a local church setting and in camping and retreat ministries. And the irony for me is that when I was a camp director, I hardly ever got to go camping because I was the administrator. I do have a claim to fame that I have slept in every building, in every camp in Oregon and Idaho. I think that's rare. I even slept in the nurses' quarters at Magruder one time, so there you go. But when I was a pastor, I often got to lead camping, and when I did, if I had my choice, it usually had to do with water. Junior high adventure camps, canoe camps, adult canoe camps, rafting trips, Rogue River rafting, all sorts of watery places. And if any of you have seen my Facebook page the last couple of weeks, I've been really highlighting a wonderful week at Wallowa Lake Camp. So many of our sacred spaces are around watery places, and there's good reasons for that. Well, I want to talk today especially about things that I have learned in terms of faithing our future, faithing the storms in life, faithing, which I think is a good verb, even if it's not proper English, but faithing things together, and lessons that I've learned over and over again through canoeing, which out here then turned into kayaking and turned into rafting sometimes, because the water out here in the West, as you know, is big water oftentimes when you're talking white water. In the East, I can do class 3, class 4, you know, but out here, you start at 4s and go to 6s, and that's impossible. But here are some things that make it more possible. I want to talk about 4 essentials in terms of faithing the storms. And the first one is to keep paddling. Turn it this way. When you're kayaking or canoeing, you want to have a tip in the water at all times. Even if you're just kind of coasting along, you want to have your paddle in the water, not just for symmetry's sake, but that's the only way you're going to be able to react quickly enough to anything coming your way. It's the only way to have stability. It's the only way to go with the flow. It's the only way to keep yourself and others safe. So even though it might feel good to drift along sometimes, you better keep a tip in the water if you possibly can. It's that sense of keeping engaged. You want to be able to respond. Other people are counting on you to respond. You want to stay loose. In fact, it's a good practice to stay loose in the hips, which is sometimes why women have an easier time in getting used to kayaks. I have a kayak buddy, who has flipped my boat 3 times, every time he's gotten into it. And I tell you what it is Not only is his center of gravity a little different than mine, but he stays rigid. When he gets scared, he stays rigid. That's a sure way you're going to go over. You have got to stay loose, that kind of go with the flow, and it helps if you've got a paddle in the water. We talk about having an oar in the water, or someone who's got no oars in the water. There's a reason for those images. There are times when, just the last trip I did down the John Day River a couple of weeks ago, where I got pretty anxious. Some of you know I had a fall and I have a major clunk in my nose to prove it. That was on land, which is where accidents usually happen when you're canoeing or kayaking or rafting. But I got a little anxious when I got back into the boat, and here come the first set of rapids. And one of our guides, who was using one of the big oar rafts, he just said to me, "Hey, J-stroke," that's what they call me, J-stroke. "Diddle, diddle down the middle." And I thought, okay. And with that little phrase in my mind, diddle, diddle down the middle, and keeping that oar in, keeping the paddle in, you could just negotiate whatever was coming, because I didn't know that river at all. I didn't know what was coming. And especially when the water's low, especially when it becomes a rock garden, is what we call it, man, oh man, keep paddling. Now, the next thing that I want to tell you is inevitably there are rocks, sometimes more than others. And when you hit a rock, it's so counterintuitive. You want to back away from it. You want to move away, but you can't. That's disaster. You have got to lean into the rock. If you're in a raft, they'll call it high siding, or inflatable, you high side. And man, if you do, everybody has to go to that high side. Everybody has to lean into the rock. And why? Well, the physics of it all. If you're leaning away from the rock, that's just going to press that side down, the water's going to rush in, and there's no saving you. I mean, you're over before you can even think about it. But if you can remember to do the counterintuitive thing and lean into the rock, eventually that water's just going to even it out, and you'll slide right off the rock and you'll keep going. You trust your boat, unless you're totally wrapped around it, but even then, you got to cling to that rock. And that's where a rock is sometimes an obstacle and sometimes your best friend. Sometimes it is that solid rock that we depend on, that rock that you can actually trust. But it's hard, it's counterintuitive. You can't back away from things. We know this, we prove it to ourselves over and over again. Tough things happen in every one of our lives. And you want to back away from it. You want to deny it. You want to just forget that it ever happened. That's a natural impulse. But you gotta lean into it. Sometimes you can back away from difficult things until it happens to you. And when it's you that are backed up onto that rock, it changes everything, doesn't it? I want to read a reflection by Paula Darcy, retreat leader. She's recounting how she was transformed by the deep grief of losing both her husband and her daughter to a drunk driver. My call to this work came slowly because it didn't come out of light. It came out of an experience of darkness. During that period of time, I had an overwhelming sense that everything I had ever believed was too small. Not necessarily wrong, but needing to grow or expand. One of the things I confronted was my idea that the proof of a loving God was when things in your life were favorable. But in the face of my loss and all that happened, something in me could not deny that God was nevertheless loving and with me. A considerable shift in my awareness was beginning to take place. I also had a growing sense that the darkness I felt was not darkness without hope. The dark was luminous. It wasn't something I could name at the time. I simply felt it to be from a realm greater than my human experience, and that it wanted to help me if I would lean into it. I guess I would call it a force of love. And when I encountered it, my aliveness was heightened right in the midst of my grief. All the things I used to worry about and focus on no longer mattered. As I focused on this love, my perspective grew. I understood for the first time that I wasn't controlling anything. Life was happening on its own, and my eyes began to open to the whole world and all its suffering. I was hardly the first person to lose a husband or a child. But in my formal, comfortable life, before it happened to me, I hadn't given this a lot of thought. But now that suffering was a lived experience, I realized there was so much I needed to change about how I understood life. I had to move beyond my old conclusions. The way I prayed changed during this time. Prior to my loss, my prayers had been petitions for things I had hoped or have, or intercessions for others. Now my prayer was, show me, or teach me how to see. A guidance from within began transforming me through that prayer. I felt a sincere desire to help others realize what I had begun to realize, that in the times for which there are no easy answers, and when your suffering is great, something from within is able to help you and wants to help you. It called me forward, and once I gave it my full attention, even though my circumstances were unchanged, I was changing. As my heart continued to open, I saw everything through new eyes. It's only by leaning into those rocks. Now, the third thing I want to say is when you hit that rock, if at all possible, hold on to your paddle. You might have to let go of the boat. It'll float. You're never alone, let's hope. That may be another lesson. Don't go alone. Someone's going to be able to catch the boat. But you don't want to be, you know what they say, up a creek without a, up a creek without a paddle. You can't go anywhere. If you can get back in the boat, but you don't have a paddle, you can't go anywhere. And that's one of those kind of folk sayings in this culture. In this case, you'd be going down the creek without a paddle, but same trouble. You don't want to be without the tools that can most help you. So if at all possible, you want to hold on to your paddle. Now, when I think about that, what are the kinds of tools, the kinds of paddles, what could that be a metaphor for? I think it's the practices that we've had, maybe since childhood, maybe new practices for us. The remembrances of things are what's going to get you through when you've lost the boat, but you still have your paddles. You know, there was a time when we kind of poo-pooed in Christian education getting kids to memorize scripture. There were traditions where you had, scripture drills and who could memorize the most lines, and everybody wanted the great two-word one, Jesus wept. But some of you are old enough to remember when we had hostage crises, and we started to then eventually get hostages back from captivities, and many were interviewed. What sustained you? They didn't have a Bible, they didn't have a hymn book, they didn't have a reading material. What sustained them was what was in their memory bank. And all of a sudden, Christian educators all over this country started thinking, we better make sure that the things that kids fill their minds with, and all of us, are worth remembering, because it might be the only thing you have to hold on to. And so we put things up like love the Lord your God with all your strength and all your mind and all your heart, and love your neighbor as yourself. And we remember those things, and we've impressed those things upon us. And we try to think about, what are the mantras? Be still and know that I am God. Let go and know that I am with you always. All the things that we put into our minds. Singing is a great way for all of us to remember those things. So when I'm diddle down the middling anxious, I start singing with Christ in my vessel. I can smile at the storm. I can smile at the storm. I can smile at the storm. With Christ in my vessel, I can smile at the storm as I go paddling on. It matters what you fill your hearts with, what you fill your minds with. So I want to pause at this time and let you get into some smaller groups of 2 or 3, 4 people that are around you. And I want you to share, if you would, think of the times when your world was rocked. Think of the times when you were high-sided and it was difficult to lean into the rock. And what paddle were you able to hold on to? What sustains you? Share for a little bit, and then we'll come back for a 4th lesson. It's always hard to interrupt your conversations, but let's come back together again here. Well, we're going to keep paddling. We're going to lean into the rocks, as counterintuitive as that is. We're going to hold on to our paddle. But then there are those times when everything fails and you're in a situation that you wish you weren't. And I'm going to tell you about one that I was in that was about the scariest that I've ever been in, and it happened years ago on the Lehigh River Gorge in Pennsylvania. And we went over. I won't tell you whose fault it was, because that's one of those things that either makes or breaks marriages. In this case, it broke it. It wasn't the only reason, obviously, but it was an amazing metaphor. Painful, most painful thing for me. We were upside down. You're going down the river. I'm in a canoe with a spray skirt on because it was pretty big whitewater. And I'm realizing as I'm gulping for air and going back down again, my foot is stuck in that netting, that spray skirt. And I'm realizing that no amount of shaking it and pulling it is freeing me, and you don't want to be going down a river with a lot of rocks and not knowing where your head's going to be next. You usually are instructed to float feet first. Impossible when you're upside down, caught. So at that point, you have to, I realized, let go of the paddle. And so in order to take another gulp of air and go back down in, and with 2 hands, free that foot that was caught. And so the 4th thing that I want to stress is trust your PFD. Trust your life jacket. Now, you know, a lot of times it's kind of cumbersome to wear. Sometimes you wish it's so hot, you wish you could take it off, or at least unzip it or unclip it. And so when things are going well, what do I need a life jacket for? What do I need this bulky PFD? But it's exactly when you don't expect things and things shatter your life and you can't even hold on to the paddles. that you got to trust the life jacket. What happened for me is, of course, it's buoyant. It's really a personal flotation device. It's not always a lifesaver. However, thanks be to God, I pop right up, and in an experience that I must say is very close to an experience of the most gracious stuff that I've ever received, a kayaker comes right underneath like it was the hand of God, right under my arm, and I just hold on to the top of his vessel, and he gets me to a safe place. God doesn't ask us to trust only when things are going well. God does not ask us to trust when we think we're ready, when we've studied enough, practiced enough, gotten the right partner, ready to handle the streams and the storms of life. God says, no, trust always. Trust now. Trust that my love is with you no matter what. Trust that we can overcome fear. Trust God. Hold on for all you're worth. Trust in the Lord always. When everything else is sinking sand, rushing water, we've got a home when we're clothed in that trust. Praise be to God. Amen.